Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Friends of the Dar, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight we welcome to our lecture series an old friend, namely Alison Shan Price. Old friend, not age, old friend. Throughout the cultural seasons in previous years, she has presented a series that focuses on a number of famous and some infamous British ladies who served the interests of the British Empire, basically expanding it throughout the information and contacts they made in their travels around the Middle East. Some were unmarried, like Gertrude Bell and Freya Stark, whereas others were married to British officials, like Violet Dixon and tonight's Doreen Ingrams. Each of these ladies produced books based on their travels, including rare photographs and other data. While entertaining to the general public and general reader, the intelligence they gathered was of use to the British control of the area. Doreen Ingrams concentrated on the areas where her husband, Howard Ingrams, was posted. And that is in those surrounding the area and the Hadramaute. Appreciation of her vital role in complementing that of her husband was extended jointly to both of them through the T.E. Lawrence Award, which was the first time that a wife was awarded along with her husband. Alison's lecture tonight is titled From Shakespeare to Southern Arabia, Doreen Ingrams, 1906 to 97, co-founders of the Ingram piece. She and her husband collected items from Hadramaute. None of them was a mobile phone. Alison doesn't mind you using your phone to disturb her and disturb the audience. I'm just joking. You know what to do with your telephones. Please, let's welcome Alison.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a delight to be back into this most beautiful building. Not only is it tremendous to actually present in here, but also the atmosphere is so tangible that it inspires and energizes. It is a cultural center where all cultures come together for collaboration. And it is a center of learning. And it is the creation of one lady. Thank you, Sheikh Hussa al-Salam al-Sabah. For the last 2 years, we've been given the opportunity to reset, to have a renaissance, a rebirth. And what we do with it is up to us. We can either once again have diversity through division, or we can celebrate diversity through collaboration. Today we look to history books to see what not to do. But I ask you, what about the information of what to do is at our fingertips? Information that has been passed down through the generations, of building relationships, of celebrating cultural traditions, of human survival, and the art of keeping the peace. This is vital for our future. A history not of the political power play, but of people. But what if this is missing from our history books? We are not being told the truth. Just 4 days ago, something incredibly strange happened I received in my inbox a post dated the 4th of December, 2013. A paper from a groundbreaking conference held in Kuwait University, entitled "The East Through the Eyes of the West." The paper was by one Dr. Irene Camberidou, a professor of University of Athens, who had been invited to present her paper, "The East Through the Eyes of Western Women Travelers of the 18th and 19th Centuries, Solidarity and Understanding the East." And naturally, I was fascinated, and I had to contact her immediately. And by return of email, she told me that she had started her research in 1997, and to date had 253 archives on Western women travelers through the Ottoman Empire in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. And she gave her permission for me to quote her research. The mammoth body of writing by women travelers of the 18th and 19th century that claim to be eyewitness descriptions of the female microcosmos provide a rich and detailed description of the Orient, including a feminine version, a female gaze. European and American women identified with the other. They too were living in a patriarchal society. They too weren't able to do what they wanted to, and they too had no access to their own money. They expressed their solidarity and participated in Muslim women's daily domestic life, customs, female social gatherings, religious celebrations, and feasts. As a result, they accused male travelers who had written about domestic manners in the East and the position of women in Islam of misinforming and misleading the readers. Their accounts, based on second or third-hand information, were a result of their unrestrained imagination. But ladies and gentlemen, in those days, women weren't allowed to publish their ideas. Without knowing the truth of collaboration, how can we build a future on positive foundations? This evening, I am honored to present to you the life story of Doreen Ingrams, the recipient of the Royal Geographical Society Award, the Gold Medal, and also the Royal Asiatic Society Medal, the Lawrence of Arabia Memorial Award, for ending blood feuds in Hadramaute. She is the first woman to get a silver tray from the Arab Club of Britain to mark her outstanding contribution to the promotion of Arab and British understanding in 1994. This lecture would not take place without the support of Sultana Rashid Al-Gaiti, the wife of Sultan Ghalib of the Hadramaute. They have both assisted in this research of the lady that the Sultan refers to simply as Dori. The youngest child of the Home Secretary, Edward Short, of David Lloyd George's post-war Liberal government, at the age of 12, having read Tolstoy, moved to create a revolution in her father's household. And this heralded a lifelong distaste for social distinction. The result was that her father ordered that it would be Doreen and not the housemaid that would have to clean out all her bedroom and everything else that went inside. This father and daughter relationship inspired Doreen to leave the family home and pursue an acting career. And this is her picture. This is her official picture for acting. In her autobiography, A Time in Arabia, Doreen considered living in terrible digs on low pay and meeting people from all walks of life prepared her marvelously for traveling through the Hadramaute, sleeping on stone floors, or rather stones in the desert, and eating dried shark. Such was her talent that Doreen rose to playing Shakespeare on stage and working with the great Dame Edith Evans. She was a free spirit, and marriage was not for her, until she met Harold Ingrams. He was on vacation for Mauritius, and at the age of 24, she married him. Doreen wrote, "I married a man of independent mind who refused to conform to the manners and mystique of the colonies. To be called Memsab filled me with a horror of the images of the women of the worst kind." Offered a home in the British community in Aden, Harold and Doreen chose to rent a house downtown, in the crater, in the hub of the local community. Harold's preference for Arabic dress did not endear him to quite a few of his superiors. Able to speak passable classical Arabic, Doreen immediately set about learning the local dialect with her tutor Ahmed. As Ahmed put on the white gloves and moved all the books aside, they studied the Holy Quran together and discussed the history of Yemen. 3,000 years ago, Yemen was a bustling metropolis built on desert trade between the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. It was an archaeologist's dream. Paleolithic and Neolithic evidence is still in existence today. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh were highly prized and used as part of various rituals in Rome, Egypt, and Greece. It created stunning architecture and a center for learning, which all students went to. And as has been mentioned before, students from all over the world throughout the centuries go to these centers of learning, regardless of if there are wars going on at the same time. That is the joy of research, finding out about these things. It was the home of queens, including the beautiful Balkis, the Queen of Sheba, who captured King Solomon of Judea. In the 1st century BCE, the might of the Roman Empire invaded, changing the trading centers forever as they made the Red Sea their primary avenue. Yemen fell into obscurity. In 1528, another empire, the Ottomans, occupied Yemen, and so began a 400-year-old battle for North Yemen with the Imams. In 1628, the English East India Company bought the rights to set up a factory in the coffee center of Mocha. Originally, it was the second most popular trade because spices were the first. But coffee would become the most lucrative business in London as inventive merchants built a new type of meeting place, the coffee house, long before they started to drink tea. Threatened by conflict in the north in the early 19th century, Britain redirected trade in Eden, which was to become a British colony, in 1837, under one Captain Haynes, who expanded the economy in the south and further enhanced by the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. In 1911, the Ottomans finally granted the Imam autonomy over much of North Yemen and created the north and south border, the Kingdom of Yemen, with the King of Yemen in the north and the British Aden Protectorate in the south. Harold was growing impatient in Aden. He wanted to make a difference in the region and requested of his superior, Bernard Riley, a man of like mind, a 9-week tour of the Hadramaute, a region of extensive tribal dispute, ruled by 2 sultans, Sultan al-Gaiti and Sultan al-Kathiri. Doreen writes of the tremendous support given by the Sultan Salah bin Ghalib al-Gaiti, who came to power in 1936. Taking a deep interest in his country The Sultan wanted to utilize all resources of his estate to benefit his people. And if he could get resources from another country coming in, why not? He is known as the modernizer of the Hadramaute. In the desert and the villages, rival tribes caused havoc, not only in the shootings and lootings, but setting fire to palm trees and demanding protection money from travelers all along the route. The camel routes were decimated. Nothing could get through. Doreen entered the harems as Harold talked to the men, she talked to the women. She recounts always hearing the same statement in the streets, the cry, "Christian! Christian woman!" causing crowds of women to come out and look at her. They wanted to know, was she the same colour all over? And was it a soap that was used? And if she ever went in to stay with them, they all wanted to find out exactly what was going on in that area. She says that they thought I had inquired my complexion from oils and lotions, and they were just interested in what happened. Years later, when the same call was made, a Christian, the speaker was corrected by everyone else, who stated, "She is not a Christian. She is the female Ingrams." On the result of Harold's report, the British government decided to support the Hadramaute people with whatever the British taxes could assist, beyond its usual support of education and health. However, Harold was determined to keep the independence of the region without British administration, and that too did not endear him to some superiors. At the request of the sultans, Harold was made the first resident officer. With no administrative assistance, Doreen was, as described by Freya Stark, the Oriental secretary in charge of translations, documentation, and most importantly, liaison. It was what followed that created an opportunity for Doreen's greatest service to the country. The following information, which I'll read on the acclaimed Ingram's piece, comes from the detailed research of Rex Smith. He has brought all documents together from all different areas, assisted by the Sultan. In February 1937, a peace between the Sultanates, unprecedented in the history of the region, was brought about primarily by Sultan Ghalib, Sayyid Sir Abu Bakr Akaf, Harold Ingrams, whose tour of the Hadramaute in 1934 was the catalyst for a number of truces. The Sultan had gone through the various areas and talked to all the tribes, but he could not cross into the other sultanate, so they had to bring them all together to be able to have peace. The government insisted that Harold was not permitted to talk to the tribes, only the tribal representatives. But as Harold refused to sit on the peace board, this was a problem. He only agreed to advise if necessary. The problem lay in how would you get to the tribes and talk to them? Well, there was one way. Doreen went instead, traveling with Sayyids or Bedouin and on a donkey most of the time in a very dangerous situation, into a region unused to women's authority. Her autobiography does not emphasize this, and much has been done to try and find out her actual participation, and Rex Smith has found out exactly this. By April 1937, 1,300 to 1,400 tribes had signed the 3-year treaty, popularly known as the Ingram's Peace. The sale of rifles dropped, trade improved, and wells were dug. Land flourished. Wheat was grown without fear of destruction in raids. Celebrated by the women who were determined to keep the peace, many of the men mentioned to Doreen and Freya that they could not wait for it to end because they missed the excitement. Penalties for breaking the truces were agreed by the Peace Board and based on the old tribal punishments: loss of livestock, loss of rifles, and hostages that were bought and stayed with the Sultan. They could be changeable. So if they asked for 6 or 7 hostages, that tribe would bring the 6 or 7 hostages, but the next day they could bring 6 or 7 other ones, and they'd change them over, and they would stay with the Sultan. Peace reigned. The RAF was only called in to quell violent disturbances after a 3-stage warning, as in the case of Bin Yamani. In 1940, the Sultans agreed on a 10-year extension. The following year, whilst judging a case in Seyun district, a feud over a tribal woman wrongly enslaved as a child, now free to start a new life and have a new husband, Harold was approached by the woman with a request to adopt her baby. She couldn't take her baby with her, and there was nowhere to put the baby. So, religious documents appeared, and Harold had to sign these documents. Documents exist because Doreen would not be able to get a passport for her to take her out if they did not. And Harold took the baby along to Doreen and said, "Here, this is your daughter." She screamed every time she saw Doreen, and Doreen was incredibly concerned. Well, you would expect that, wouldn't you? She would never seen anybody like Doreen before. So they brought in the most wonderful of ladies to look after her. Bit by bit, Zara got used to her new mother. But she was found to be 2 years older than everybody thought she was because of malnutrition. So a lot had to be done for her, and cod liver oil seems to be the staple diet. At the same time, she found that she was expecting her own daughter, Layla. This is our peace picture. There we go. And she gave birth to Layla in Cairo in 1940, when the bombs were falling on Cairo itself. Doreen used to put both children, and I apologize for the actual photograph itself, we tried to get a clearer version. Both girls were put in baskets on the side of a mule, and they went with their mother on many short journeys. This is Layla, and there's Zara. Layla will follow in her mother's footsteps. Her story is unique, but that might be a very good idea to keep it for another day. As Eleanor Gardiner, a geologist who visited the Hadramaute with Freya Stark and Gertrude Caton Thompson in 1938, said, "We found their name was an open sesame to us wherever we went. We were asked if we knew Ingrams, and more importantly, we were asked if we knew Doreen." In 1940, Harold launched the Hadramaute Bedouin Legion based on the very famous Arab Legion of Transjordan, made up of soldiers from all over the Arab world. And although British officers advised them and inspected the soldiers, none commanded the legion. Harold spoke in London at this conference and this speech about an Iraqi officer who gained a great reputation for justice in developing villages, setting up a local council to pay for village improvements. His methods acted as an example to other officers. Once a quarter, a mounted patrol went out to survey the area. Doreen went with them, and these are her words. "I went with the first camel patrol of the Bedouin Legion on its round trip of 500 miles at the end of April 1943. The objective was to pass by and stay at forts built by the Legion, in addition to the Transjordan tents on the way. The tents and the campfire attracted the tribes to come and talk to us. Each morning, the NCO blew his whistle for us to rise at 4 a.m. It was dark and cold, and we sat around the dying campfire to eat our dates and drink our ginger coffee. I then had to saddle my own camel. Another whistle brought us beside our camel, a third to mount them, which seemed rather strict to me, until my companions explained to me that this routine was so that the camel did not tire. Every hour to the minute, the whistle blew, and we'd have to dismount. And therefore, what happened next was the camel was able to rest. And this continued all the way through the day. We covered 25 miles a day, and lunch was rice and dried shark. Tea was unleavened bread and shark sauce. As we got further from the coast, we didn't eat in front of the people because they looked as if they were starving, but kept back some of the children to feed them. I noticed a little skeleton hanging onto the hand of another boy. They came to sit beside me. I saw that the skeleton was blind and covered in sores, and I knew he would soon die. The little boy told me that he was his stepbrother, that his own mother had been divorced, and that the little boy's stepmother did not like him. I asked to see his father, and he was very happy that I arranged to send the child to Mukalla, writing a note to my husband to tell him that this time I had sent him a present. A week later, he turned up on a donkey with the note, and my husband took him in and gave him a diet of cod liver oil and milk. Subsequently, Effendi, as we called him, became the first pupil in the blind school, which was started because we felt that there were so many children like him. More blind and crippled children poured in. A Somali woman taught them to make baskets and mats and brooms and to garden and help with the housework. The biggest boys were taught Braille by a merchant of Mukalla. A blind man came twice daily for religious instruction. And when it had to be taken over for a hospital in the war, we moved them to a house helped by Sultan Ghalib at the back of our own. We took in orphan and destitute children not yet old enough to go to school. They would squat near my pantry for cod liver oil and milk. The first newsletter of the Friends of the Hadramaute, a charitable trust, edited by Sultan Salah bin Ghalib, writes, Doreen established the Noor Institute for the Blind, which has been adopted as the Trust's first project in 1997. Doreen continued, of women and children, those suffering from the famine and too ill to go to a camp or to the children's village needed care. What to do? I needed to start a hospital with beds and utensils made of kerosene cans. Dr. Renee, the state doctor, and Dr. Batty of the Legion Hospital, they helped us. Rahima al-Jawaf and I did most of the nursing, helped by Bedouin women. It was a case of the blind leading the blind. We didn't know what to do, but we had to do something. We got 6 Bedouin ladies trained as nurses. One's in charge of the blind school, and another's in charge of the girls' school. The Sultan offered a room to bring ladies together so they could sew and sell their work. Britain gave £300,000, and the Sultan gave 300,000 rupees for famine relief. Every day, the RAF flew in 300 tons of grain to the wadis. In her autobiography, Doreen asks a very difficult question. She asks, I wonder if we were right. What will happen when we leave? The famine will go on. Will they be looked after? Doreen's humanitarian efforts are documented in the newsletter. She's credited with starting the first Bedouin girls' school, the Women's Centre, the Famine Centre, and the Children's Village for orphans. At the end of their posting in 1944, Harold and Doreen did not forget their links with the region. Back in England, Doreen lectured for the Central Office of Information on the Hadramaute and the lives of Arab women, trying to dispel many of the misconceptions prevalent in Britain. In 1956, she joined the BBC Arabic service as a senior assistant in charge of talks and magazine programmes, including the Women's Programme. During the years at the BBC, she had the opportunity of duty tours to many Arab countries, including her great pleasure to go back to the Hadramaute, and she could see all the progress that was going on. She was wrong, and she admits she was wrong. They had developed, they had grown. All anybody ever needs is being shown the way forward, to being linked with people, to working together. She visited the country again in later years with her daughter, Layla. And on her retirement, Doreen became a founder member of the Council for the Advancement of Arab-British Understanding, and continued, as she will always continue while she was alive, to take a great interest in the events in the Hadramaute. The books she has are what she passionately believes in. There is one book here called the Palestinian Papers, which I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, you would be incredibly interested to read. This was one of her passions. She supported the causes. And at a much later life, she would offer a scholarship to the girls of university, especially girls that were in need. She never forgot what she had learnt in the region. And it has been a great pleasure to speak to you this evening about a lady who I hope you would start to think a little differently about, rather than just think that she was a wife of somebody. Because if we do not stand and learn, and we do not talk and listen, how are we going to have any relationship together? Thank you.